Hi, folks. In American history, the issue of slavery has been a very difficult thing to deal with ever since the beginning of our nation as a republic. Because just knowing that in some parts of the country, the South, plantations depended on slaves, and in the North, much more industry was actively against slavery. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 really had an impact that no one expected. Now, what's the Dred Scott case? Goes all the way back to when Dred Scott was a slave. He was with a family. They were living, first of all, in Alabama, then they moved to Missouri, then eventually he ended up in what's present day Minnesota, Wisconsin Territory, then present day Minnesota. What happened was he was bought out by a man named John Emerson. And John Emerson was going to be his new owner. But while he was there, he met his future wife, Harriet Robinson, also owned by one of the traders or one of the other individuals that they ran into in Wisconsin. They married and had two children. Well, when John Emerson came back to Missouri, Dred Scott was aware of a certain policy in states that didn't have or allowed at least some kind of freedom, and that was Wisconsin Territory. Well, it turns out there was this concept called once free, always free. In other words, once you're in a state which allows you to be free, then you can be free in other states. Well, he attempted filed paperwork in the state of Missouri to accomplish that, and it was rejected. It went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which in 1857 ruled in a very peculiar way. One, that Supreme Court decision said that slaves did not have rights in federal court. They were not seen as citizens in federal court. Two, states themselves, states that were slave states, did not have to recognize the once free, always free doctrine. Now you have to understand this was kind of a doctrine that wasn't talked about. It was there, but it wasn't bragged about. It was on the books. It was a doctrine that was real. But in the case of the Supreme Court said you don't have to honor it, and also suggesting that the Wisconsin Territory went too far by accepting that doctrine. So this case really impacted the Robson or the Dred Scott family. However, there was a happy ending to it. Two things happened. One, this case really upset abolitionists. It really mobilized and motivated abolitionists to push harder and harder for the freedom of the slaves. And some believe it was a further catalyst that would lead to the Civil War. The other thing is this: John Emerson's family their children became abolitionists, and the family paid for the legal expenses for the Dred Scott family, so that they fought for him all the way. So what happened? Whenever that court ruled that way, what they decided to do is the John Emerson family went ahead and took them to a state where they went ahead and bought them as slaves, and then put them in a state where they could be set free. And they were set free. So Dred Scott himself lived for 1 year in freedom, and the rest of his kids had a chance to grow up in freedom. And as has been reported, there are some descendants still alive today. So the Emerson family, the children, were the ones that effectively paid for the legal counsel for the Dred Scott family. And when they had gotten that decision, it was so disappointing that the family bought them as slaves and then set them free, which was a beautiful expression of what they thought about slavery and the abolition movement. So it was a landmark decision that, shall we say, impacted the country for decades to come and led probably to the Civil War and even other ramifications that were found later on. It is some believe that, for example, later on in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education, we see the impact of Dred Scott. And it's something that, well, we still remember today. Thank you for watching.